A few years ago, I committed to hosting a potluck dinner from 5 to 8 p.m. Some of my guests chose not to bring food. They stayed 2 hours longer than invited, and they asked me to commit to more events, like babysitting their kids, while they were at my house. It was exhausting. And sadly for me, this wasn't a one time or one person thing for me. I actually regularly spent time with people who subtly belittled me or my husband. I spent time with people who guilt tripped me if things weren't exactly how they wanted. And I even spent time with people who seemed to not even like me or my personality. Maybe you can think of some people like that in your life where you're like, they act like they don't even like me, but we all keep spending time together. Why was I doing this? I simply was not taught any skills or tools to set standards, communicate boundaries, or hold anyone accountable. So if you're struggling to feel respected in your own circles, or if you've been told that you aren't respectful of others, this episode is for you. Welcome back to the weekly fellowship where we gather for deep, transformational conversation in the fellowship of faithful women. I'm your host, Reagan Clement, and I love working with women in my life coaching programs and online community, the Rising Tide Fellowship. In prayer, I was asked to build community for women to be seen, heard, and nourished in this society of isolation and confusion. When I asked God how in the world to build a community like that with so little funds, his answer was simple: collaboration. So in the past year, I've asked many friends and coaches to step forward and offer their time, talent, and resources to make this community something really special for our members. And it's turned out to be really special for ourselves too. And our members have stepped up to contribute their own unique gifts as well. To spend time with us in community, join today at risingtidefellowship.com. And if you'd like to work with me personally, head to risingtidefellowship.com and just click on my name. Let's get started. Okay, so why the heck was I putting up with disrespect from people I consider to be friends or family? And I want you to think, if you're on that side of it, I think most of the members in the Rising Tide Fellowship are actually on that side of it. We're kind of wanting to learn how to stop being walked on, stop being disrespected, stop people pleasing. But I have loved ones in my life who are on the other side, who are like, they've heard me say, "You are disrespecting me again. Please stop." And so if we have some listeners that are on that side, where you have somebody in your family who's continually said, like, "You can't talk to me like that," then this is also for you. Again, I don't know how many of our listeners are on that side, but this is for both, because this is relationships and there's two sides of everything, right? And I would say that in a lot of when I look back and I look at some of my toxic behaviors that I really had to learn and outgrow, in many instances, I was the one being disrespected, but in other instances, I was the one disrespecting others. Maybe I was a victim to some persecutors in my life, but in other relationships, I was persecuting and making people into victims. So, that toxic relationship, if you grew up in that dynamic, then that's what's comfortable, and you'll play any role. Sometimes you'll play any role. And that's what I found in myself. So you might notice as we go along that you might be the victim in some of this, and you might actually be the persecutor in some of these examples. So for me, I honestly just didn't have the tools to change these dynamics with my family and friends. These were community members and family members that had just always been there, or that maybe they came into my life in a way that really wasn't my choice or design. And so I didn't know how to communicate clear boundaries, communicate my needs. And I definitely, like we talked about last week, I did not have the ability to feel peace if they responded poorly to anything. I was just really working to make sure nobody responded poorly to me. And I actually blamed them for many years. And I don't know if you have people in your life where you feel like, oh, they stayed long again, or they talked to me like that again, or they came over and they gossiped the whole time. And it's easy to blame them for these behaviors. And I blamed them for many years. But eventually, I had to take some radical responsibility for my own role in allowing this to continue across multiple relationships. So I challenge you to think about if there's someone who consistently creates resentment in your heart, is it their fault? Or maybe is it your role to make a change there? Do they know that they're creating resentment there? Have you communicated what's going on? Have you taken any steps? And in order to do that, we have to learn how to communicate boundaries. And when I learned how to do this, and we're going to go through kind of the 5 major steps that it took me to learn how to do this. But when I learned how to do this, I actually started communicating my boundaries with people in my life. And some people responded like big babies. And I think I kind of knew they were going to beforehand, and I hadn't accepted it. But once they did, I was like, oh my goodness, this is what I was always afraid of with you. This is what I've been afraid of for 10, 15 years. And so when they responded like that, it was like, oh my goodness, they, I think I always knew deep down that they were going to respond that poorly. But then other people, when I started communicating like, hey, that makes me uncomfortable, or hey, 8:00 is 8:00, it's time for us to pack up, or whatever it was. Hey, and I even told some of my friends, hey, I learned how to set boundaries. And I mean, I told this to a lot of people, like, hey, I took the women's school, I've had counseling, I've had a big transformational journey here, and I'm going to start communicating my needs more clearly and setting boundaries, because that's what's healthy and that's what is good for our relationship, so that this doesn't become a place of resentment or anger or frustration. This stays a really good relationship. But I've never done that before, so I may mess up some, and I hope you'll forgive me. And I hope that you won't think that our relationship is changing or something bad is happening. It's just me applying these new skills. And when I told some of my family members and friends that, they were so proud of me. I mean, I can still think of the Mayer family. When I told them this, we had this big communication time of like, hey, we're shifting some things. Just wanted to tell you guys. They were so proud. They were like, almost like, oh, finally, we've been waiting for you. Like they were relieved, because they could see that I was not being honest with what I needed, and I wasn't communicating with them what my needs were and setting boundaries with them. So they never really felt totally comfortable with me, because they didn't know where the line was, because I wouldn't communicate it. So while we were friends and we loved each other, they were desperately waiting for me to grow up and learn how to communicate what I needed. And once I did, they were just over the moon for me. I mean, it was just amazing. And so when I experienced these positive people, I was going, oh my goodness, this is our future. And my husband was doing this with me. We're like, wow, we've had all these relationships, some good, some bad, some okay, but we didn't have the skills to really start this high quality relationship, life-giving relationships. And now we have that. And it's like the boundaries bring healthy people to us, and they kind of repel unhealthy people. Unhealthy people don't like boundaries. They run from them. And I was one of those people. I ran from people who set boundaries. It made me uncomfortable. So I'm not judging anyone in this conversation, but I just want you to see, once you have the skill, it invites other people who have that skill, and it makes everybody really comfortable and really more intimate and more close. So today, I enjoy those high quality, life-giving relationships with women who love and forgive and yet also hold me accountable. And then my husband and I, our family, gets to enjoy that with other families. And so I wanted to kind of break down these 5 steps for me that I had to work through really imperfectly to get to this point where I have multiple high quality friendships. So first, and I would say this is the biggest one, and this is what we've talked about in season 1 of the podcast. This is 90% of what I do in my coaching program. and in all of the one-on-one coaching, and so much of the Rising Tide Fellowship is really building my own self-image, or building your self-image. So a reason I wouldn't set boundaries is because I didn't feel worthy of setting standards. I didn't feel worthy of communicating my needs. And that was deeply rooted. And I didn't know that that's what I believed. I didn't know that's what I was feeling. But a big reason for not being willing to say, no, your kids are being very disrespectful and they're breaking our table. Please ask them to stop. I could not say that. I could not say that. I mean, we had a teenager at our house take some of our liquor, and I could not tell his mother, like, hey, your son has been taking our liquor. Like, that's a very necessary thing, but I couldn't do it. And when I really looked deeply into why I was withholding, there were obviously a couple of reasons, and we're going to go into both of those, but a big part was my own self-image. Do I see myself as this brave, strong woman who's holy and good, and that she has a high character? And then when she communicates things, it's for the good of others and herself and her family. I just didn't see myself that way. I saw myself as needing to stay small so that other people stayed calm and happy, and needing to be the peacekeeper so that no like fights or big emotions would erupt. And so I really had to go and rewire who and how I saw myself as a woman. And that was a big step. And so if you've gone through the woman's school, you know what that means. If you haven't, that's okay. You've been, but I just want to put that in your mind as one of the biggest ways to outgrow toxic behaviors. First and foremost is we have to believe we're worthy of outgrowing them. And I know the word worthy gets tossed around a lot in the secular world, and we act like we're worthy of things without Christ. And that's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that Christ calls us and Christ chooses us. I mean, he even chose to die for us. And that through him and his love makes us worthy. And in fact, if I didn't set standards and I didn't set boundaries, it would be disrespecting all the work and all the sacrifices he's made, because he finds me worthy of love. So that's step one. And if that's kind of hitting you like, ooh, I need more on that, my self-image is in the dirt, then go back to season 1 and find our stuff on self-image. Now, part 2, the next thing I had to learn, I mentioned setting standards for myself. What does that mean? This is a skill. Setting standards for yourself is a skill. I want to give you an example here of something small you could set standards with. Like, what if you set standards for your Christmas party? And you're like, here are just the basic standards for my Christmas party. It's going to have nice music. It's going to smell good. It's going to have good food. We're going to turn the TV off. We're going to refrain from talking on our phones and just sitting around on our phones and texting. We're going to have active conversation and fun. Maybe we're going to play some games. But you're just starting to set standards on what you're designing your Christmas party to look like. And that's really benign, right? It's really easy to go, this is what I'd like it to look like. This is what I would not like it to look like. So that's an easy way to go. Yeah, of course, we have to set standards on everything. But actually, every client I've ever worked with struggles with setting standards. And I personally really struggled with this. And so I want to give you a better example, something that hurts a little bit more. And it's my 16-year-old self. So I want you to imagine yourself at 16 years old, or you can imagine me at 16 years old. And I'm this young woman, and I'm starting to, I'm allowed to date. I'm allowed to say, like, yes, we can go to the movies, or we can be boyfriend and girlfriend, whatever. This is my first entry into dating. And should that 16-year-old girl have basic standards for dating? Yeah, we're all adult women, so we're like, absolutely she should have standards. Like, here are some examples. I have a good relationship with my parents, and I do not tolerate anyone interfering with that. That's a standard. I am treated and spoken to with kindness and respect. That's a standard. I do not tolerate negative or objectifying comments about my body. That's a standard. One more. I do not tolerate pressure to partake in sexual activities. That's a standard. So, of course, we want our 16-year-old girls in life to definitely set standards, right? Or they're going to get eaten up. They're going to get chewed up and spit out. They've got to have standards. But also, it's really good to have standards because as a 16-year-old girl, I thought that was me being naggy or me being pushy. Or some of the boys in my life said, like, you're just trying to change me. And it's like, I believed them. I thought, oh no, I'm trying to make them into something, right? But that's not the truth. The truth is these standards are the boys who wanted to date me, they would either rise and meet them or they would leave. And that's not me forcing anyone to change. That's me setting a standard and they can rise to meet it, which if you know, Bishop Fulton Sheen said the standard of any society is set by the level of its women because men rise to meet the level of its women. So when I learned that in my 20s, I was like, oh my goodness, I've been feeling so guilty about setting standards as a young girl. So I'm hoping you can really see, like, of course, a 16-year-old girl should set standards. But what I find is that when we switch and we move to adulthood, do you really believe that you can set standards with your husband, with your mother, with your adult children, with your little children, with your friends? Can you make declarative statements about your own standards like, I do not participate in gossip? Can you say, I do not allow drunkenness in my home? Or can you say, I do not tolerate pornography in my home? Like, do you have standards and are you able to communicate them? Or are you still struggling with that lie from the culture that to set any standard is to be judgmental? And so I really just wanted to spend a few minutes here diving into that because it's been planted in our heads. This culture has two extremes. We have the you do you extreme, right? You've heard that before, like, oh, you do you, babe, you do you, girl, you do whatever you want to do. There is zero moral compass and there are zero consequences. That's one side of the culture. And the other side of the culture is saying, I'm judging the person, not the action, and I'm going to attempt to control their behavior, either by personal relationship, manipulation, punishment, or by cancel culture. If it's somebody like somebody saying something that I don't like, I'm going to do cancel culture and try to get them shut down. And these are these two extremes. And we feel like we have to choose one because that's what the media does. That's what our society does. It makes you feel like it's black or white, A or B, good or bad. But those are both really dangerous extremes. And there's a lot of room. The virtue's in the middle. The virtue is in the middle. There's a lot of room in the middle for us to say, I'm not going to judge you as a person. I'm going to forgive and be humble and understanding, but I'm also going to set a basic standard and say, no, there is a moral compass. And I do have a moral compass. And so there's this middle ground. And sometimes we're 2 steps to the right, and sometimes we're 2 steps to the left. And depending on what the relationship is, right? Like if I have more accountability with my husband, I can say more things like, oh, I really don't know if you should be doing that. That feels morally wrong to me. Where if that's something like if it's my friend or a distant relative, I probably wouldn't say that. I'd probably say, I don't want to participate in this conversation, right? And so we kind of get our choices there in the middle to really decide, but we don't have to go, I'm judging you or I'm letting you do everything you ever wanted to do without consequence. That is just not it. So once we realize I'm valuable and worthy enough to set standards, and now I'm going to go through my life and start setting them. So that's what I want you to think about. If you could just take a piece of paper and just write down like things I tolerate and things I don't tolerate, things I allow and things I don't allow. And just starting to really, or even things I like or things I want in my life and things I don't want in my life. The Women's School does this really great activity called the wants and don't wants list. And you it takes you through, like, in my family, what do I want and not want? In my marriage, what do I not want? What do I want? In my home, what do I want and not want? And it really you start to create these standards for yourself and go, wow, I don't want to be spoken to like that anymore. Or maybe whatever your relationship is, it's kind of eating at you a little bit. You can kind of start to see, what do I really want and not want in this relationship? Because first you had to believe you're worthy of even doing that. And then you had to believe that it's actually good and holy to set that standard and to get clear on what you want. And then the hard part comes. Okay, I know I don't want to be treated like that, but how do I set a boundary? How do I do it? It's very uncomfortable. And there are so many great books. There are great courses on boundaries. The Women's School has a great course on boundaries. I'll link that in the show notes. But a lot of times with boundaries, it's just going to take some practice. So one, understanding that boundaries is not punishing or trying to get people to change. We're just choosing how involved with this behavior we want to be. So let's say someone is gossiping. A boundary is not asking them to stop gossiping. That's accountability. A boundary is just saying, how involved with this gossip do I want to be? Do I want to leave the conversation? Do I want to change the topic? What do I want to do? How can I set a boundary here so that I can protect myself from being involved and coming up against this gossip every day? And then two, really understanding when you set boundaries that access to you is a right and not a privilege. And I think this gets really out of whack in our cancel culture right now. In the secular world, even in the Christian world, we're just canceling people out of our life, like left and right. You made me mad, you're out. You made me mad, you're out. And I think that this comes from a place of, it started out as a good thing and it just got really applied immaturely. So access to us is a right. I mean, it's not a right, it's a privilege, right? It's not a right, it's a privilege. But that doesn't mean that I have to cut people off. That's an option. Yeah, if you have somebody that you really need to cut off, that's an option. But think about if someone is unable to regulate their own anger or stress and they're constantly lashing out, maybe you could just shift and exit that interaction when the toxic or hurtful behavior comes up. Maybe it's too aggressive and you choose, no, I'm not going to be around that person until they get help. That's your choice. But there's a wide variety of how we can respond to this. We could shift how often we see them. We could, like I said, we could just exit those interactions that get toxic. We could choose to no longer share vulnerable details about ourselves with people who have really shown us that they don't respect them. And then we could also just refuse to engage in certain conversations about certain topics like my body, my life choices, my religion, my politics, whatever it is. If you have someone who's being aggressive or controlling or manipulative or anger or lashing out, then you might go, okay, I'm not gonna have this conversation with this person anymore. I'm gonna keep the topic here and here. And so you can revoke access to yourself without cutting people off in so many ways. And that's just 4 ways. And I want to give you some examples of when you might need to apply one of those. And so if someone in your life is highly domineering, and when you try to share your needs or you're trying to set a boundary, they do not listen to you. They twist it, or they get angry, or they say you're being emotional. If they're highly domineering and they will not hear you, that's a time to start thinking about, how should I revoke access to me so that I can set this boundary? If the relationship remains unequal after many attempts to communicate, hey, I need this to change. Hey, it still feels like you're putting yourself above me, or it feels like you are, I'm always giving and showing up, and I'm not receiving. It's not, the reciprocity is not there. after many attempts to change, if this relationship is continuing to remain unequal, that's a time that you might consider revoking access. If the person doesn't keep their word, that's time I would consider revoking access. And again, this isn't your whole life you're revoking. You get to decide on what scale. Maybe it's, whatever, however you choose to do that. And then lastly, if every time you bring up your needs or hurts, they're met with dismissiveness or defensiveness, that's a sign you need to revoke some access. So again, shifting how you see someone, exiting interactions, just protecting yourself and not sharing as much, those are all ways to revoke access. So that's kind of some of the basics on starting to set boundaries, really learning I'm not punishing, I'm learning to remove myself from interactions that I don't wish to be a part of. I'm removing myself from behaviors that I don't wish to be a part of. It has nothing to do with saying, I want that person to change right now, because that's very, very different. And then when I did this, I would say that I messed up a lot. So practicing communicating these boundaries was very difficult, and I really had to learn how to be okay being very imperfect. I had to mess up a lot. I had to honestly, it's humility. It feels a little bit humiliating to say, hey, friend, I need to talk to you about something. And I'm going to tell you what this behavior makes me uncomfortable. So I'm going to ask that we don't talk about this anymore. Or whatever it looks like, whatever your specific example is. But if you mess it up and you're like, I accidentally said, you're making me really mad and you need to stop. Well, that's not going to go well, is it? And so really just getting comfortable saying, I'm going to practice this. I'm going to mess up a lot, but I'm going to choose to look at this as winning and as progress instead of as failure, because I know that practicing and trying to set boundaries and to communicate my needs is actually very courageous, especially if you're a people pleaser and you tend to play, if there's that codependent relationship and one is the manipulator and one is more the I'll change for you. If you're on the I'll change for you side, it is very difficult and very courageous to practice these. It's hard. And I mean, I've been learning these for, I don't know, I first started learning like 6 years ago, and still, I mean, I just finally did this with one close relationship, and it was so difficult. And so looking at this like, hey, you know what? I didn't say it perfectly, but I tried. And I can always apologize. I can always say like, oh, I'm sorry if I said that as if I was attacking you. This is hard for me to say, and I apologize for attacking you. Let me take a breath and try to say that differently, because it's really not about you. It's about me needing to distance myself from this behavior. And it's just, so I'm learning how to still hold my boundaries while also apologizing or shifting or understanding if I totally blew it and didn't say it in the best way. I had a friend recently attempt to hold a boundary with me, but it came out in all accusations. And I was like, oh, nope, I don't accept 17 lines of accusation. So take a breath, figure out how you're trying to say that, and then try again. Because that's one of my boundaries. I'm not going to just listen to a text full of accusations. So just learning that and going, okay, let me take a breath. She's going to try again. Oh, you felt this way when I did this. Okay, yes, I can apologize for that and change that for sure. So here are just a couple of examples of little ways that we can set boundaries around our life, just so that you can start seeing, oh, I do or do not do that. So what if I told my supervisor, I'm sorry, I cannot take on additional tasks beyond my workload. I already have a full plate of responsibilities. That's a big one. I actually had to do that a couple of years ago and say, none of these last 6 months of tasks are actually on my job description. And I'm starting to feel pretty overwhelmed. So I would like for us to go back to my job description and really get tight on what you want for today. What do you want me to do for these weeks? Because right now I feel like I'm doing 3 jobs. And that really worked. They understood because they just didn't realize what was happening. Here's another example. I could let my parents know that I need some alone time on weekends to recharge and pursue hobbies, setting boundaries around my personal time if they're spending too much time at my house, right? That's not my problem, but that might be your problem. In friendships, you could say, I'm not comfortable discussing a certain topic because that's very sensitive to me. And you're just establishing boundaries around conversation topics. So again, sometimes we look at boundaries like they're these big punishments or these big cutoffs. And these are just so simple and small. They're just communicating our needs. In our marriage or in a romantic relationship, what if I communicate to my husband, hey, I need more freedom and independence to make my own decisions, especially about things that just pertain to me. And so I'm setting boundaries around my autonomy. Like you're kind of starting to encroach and get into some codependency here, and I want to go ahead and set a boundary there. Social invitations. We talked about this last week, but what if you just say, I can't come to that event. I need to prioritize self-care and rest. Well, then you're setting boundaries around your energy and your time. That one's a hard one. Setting boundaries around your time. I think people oftentimes have a really hard time with that. And then even just, my daughter just went to the eye doctor today. Even just advocating for yourself during a doctor's appointment, I can say, these are my concerns. I can ask questions. I can assert my preferences, and I can say, I really just want your professional opinion on a diagnosis, and then I would like to do the research and choose treatment options. But I don't want you to just tell me what we have to do today, right? So that's just setting boundaries around my freedom to make my own healthcare decisions. And then last but not least, I think this one's a cool one because it's really just boundaries with yourself. What if I say, I'm going to start my nighttime routine and I'm going to unplug all the screens an hour before bed because I want to prioritize my sleep. And so then I'm setting boundaries with technology for myself. And so that example to me really helps me see that boundaries are just they can be so simple and so small, and so helpful. They're life-giving. So I guess that last but not least, I wanted to say setting boundaries and holding other people accountable in a loving way are very, very different from each other. And I wanted to talk about both today, but I think boundaries is just too big. And I didn't want us to get confused because accountability is very different from boundaries. They serve totally different purposes and they're both valuable. Holding people accountable, I didn't even know that was a skill. I did not even know that was something that is possible. I just thought, you do you, right? Because that's what the culture says. Everybody gets to do whatever they want to do, and that's it. And in some ways, that's true. In saying like, I'm going to give people the freedom to make their own choices. I'm not going to infringe upon their freedoms. But accountability is different. The purpose of accountability is where I can address behaviors and actions that maybe aren't consistent with what my friend or relative already agreed to. So let's say like with my husband, if we have a marital agreement, we have basic standards that we hold. And so if he steps out of those, holding him accountable would be to lovingly encourage him to take responsibility for his actions and to get back in alignment with our shared goals. Boundaries with my husband would be really to establish and maintain my own personal limits. So boundaries say, what is acceptable here, honey, and what is unacceptable? And it's about helping me protect me. And for his boundaries, it's about him protecting him. And accountability is about how can we get back into alignment? And those are just so different. So I want to go into accountability next week so we can see how valuable it is and how it's a skill that our society thinks is bad. I mean, I've had clients openly say, I think accountability is wrong. So I understand that it's very deeply ingrained in our culture to think that any form of accountability is actually destructive. But if we don't have any form of accountability in our culture, it is detrimental to our culture. I mean, our culture is just going down the drain, which we kind of see, don't we? So we'll talk about that some next week. I want to pause here and just open up to you guys. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your opinions, questions, concerns.